Welcome to the Two Tall Jews Show, presented by the On This Day in Jewish History Instagram page. All right. On today's show, we are very excited to be with Sam, Karl, and Rae Austin, hosts of the Diaspora Radio Podcast, dedicated to discussing all things Jewish and Zionism. Their show is meant for Jews living in the diaspora or not, and so that they have access to the latest news updates and resources to fight anti-Semitism in your local communities. Sam and Rae, welcome to the show.
Hey guys.
Hi.
I hope that intro was accurate.
Yeah, it was good.
So before we get started, this is a question that we ask all of our guests, and just to understand that this is still just a Two Tall Jews show. How tall are you guys?
5'5", 5'6".
Right.
Not so tall.
Not so tall. Too tall and not so tall. That's okay.
We can be the short too short.
Yeah, medium-sized. So obviously we don't really know each other other than like a couple DMs. We obviously, we want to get to know you a little better. So can you tell us a little bit about how the show started, maybe the story of your friendship, maybe if it's connected, and then we have some follow-up questions about your show.
Definitely.
Do you want to start with how you started the podcast?
Yeah. So I actually started the podcast about a year ago, and it was because I did a ton of advocacy for Jews and for Israel within university. And after graduation, everything kind of stops. And there's not a lot, like you see what's going on, but there's not a lot of advocacy outside of university. It's hard, I guess, as an adult to like get involved. So I wanted to continue to raise awareness about anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias. And so I started the Diaspora Radio Podcast. But originally I was just covering anti-Semitic attacks, and it got so heavy that I stopped because it was very depressing. And it wasn't until
April, I think.
yeah, that Raylene and I came up with the idea of actually
Right around the time that all the BLM protests and stuff started was the time we decided we needed to start speaking out a little more. For me, I was like, nobody knows that BLM as an organization is anti-Israel, and I want to promote that it is because it's not okay.
yeah, we're for of course,
I mean,
human rights,
not
everything.
saying that Black Lives don't matter, just saying that the organization is
The organizations that go in as a human rights, but then also have an anti-Israel agenda. That's something that we want to say, listen, you can do things like be for human rights, but also you don't have to put down the Jews. You don't have to attack Israel. So we had that conversation ourselves, and Raylene is actually my cousin.
Yeah.
So that's how we got involved in this, and we discussed having Rae as the co-host and being a part of this, and then it kind of became reinvigorated, and we got life to it, and it's taken off.
Well,
That's awesome.
Hoping.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we kind of started around the same time, but we basically, we met 3 years ago. I don't know if you're familiar with Hasbara Fellowships.
Yeah, my brother and your
And my
brother
brother, yeah.
were actually Hasbara fellows.
So we met on it, and originally Isaac saw me, and he was like, "No way, I'm going to become friends with this guy."
It's funny because now he's the only one I talked to from the trip. So,
Same.
yeah.
And we were just we got along. We started speaking, and then we were like, we should start a podcast. And then we had no idea what to do it about because like it's just hard to come up with a topic. Originally, we were like, let's just do like a comedy podcast, and comedy podcasts are hard unless you're together all the time. And he was in Boston, I was here, so we never really did anything. And it's funny, it's ironic because our first idea that was like more along these lines of what it became was we wanted to create something called the Diaspora Report. Yeah. So who's your target audience in terms of like where can people find your show, the Diaspora Radio?
So it can be found on Spotify, and Apple is generally what we promote just because those are the bigger ones. But Anchor just automatically puts it out for us on, I think, pretty much every podcast.
Every platform that will take
except
it.
for Podbean.
And the one that you get most, where do you get the most listens? Spotify or iTunes?
Apple.
iTunes, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then your target audience, is it mostly Jewish students or?
Mostly young Jewish people, or just young people who are interested in Israel but really don't know the story or the facts or stuff like that.
We've actually it's been pretty exciting the last few days, I would say. We've got a lot of comments
Yeah.
on just what we've released.
Or direct messages. About Zionism and questions about
Judaism. I think one of our biggest episodes actually, or that did the best, would be the one on converting to Judaism and what that's like. So we're actually getting a lot of people, although our target audience would have been, say, Jews age 18 to 25, maybe 30. We've actually got a lot of people asking us questions that are not Jewish or interested in converting to Judaism or want to know more about, what is Zionism and what is self-determination.
We'll honestly maybe come at us a little bit defending Palestine, and then we'll say something back and they'll be like, oh, that actually makes sense. I didn't know that.
So we've actually reached probably a larger audience, which is amazing. Coming from, as you guys know, an advocacy background, it'd be that other 80% is kind of the people that are like commenting and getting involved. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So obviously the word diaspora, it's a term that's used a lot sort of these days and recently in the sort of ongoing conversation about Jews and their location. How would you describe the term as it pertains to your podcast specifically?
That's interesting. So when I came up with diaspora, it was because I wanted to be the Jews outside of Israel, because I know there's a different dynamic between like Israeli Jews and Jews within the diaspora. So it was pretty much just to unite us as Jews living outside of Israel on things that are relevant to us and topics that are relevant to us. Is there anything you want?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much how we settled on that.
Yeah. Like I told you, like we had the same idea. So like we're just trying to understand, because some people don't understand that, like especially like non-Jews, they don't understand what the word diaspora means to us. But again, either way, they're not the target audience, so it's okay.
And that's actually on our interview. We did a podcast with the Pew Pew Jew, and it was really interesting to hear his take on the diaspora and everything as well, because a lot of people don't understand, like, oh, if I'm wearing an IDF shirt, that means, I am for all Jews or something, but it's not necessarily. That's showing support to Israel, not to Judaism itself. So it's interesting.
It is, yeah. And as of lately too, with all the protests going on against Bibi and stuff in Israel, it's important for people to understand that, like, we might support Israel, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we support everything they do.
Yes. Or the governments. And I think especially coming from advocacy background, a lot of people are like, think that it's just between you're either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, and they don't understand everything in between that and all the politics and Israeli politics and everything that can affect that.
Would you say that, speaking both to your advocacy background and just now with your podcast, that conflation is a common occurrence just amongst people you interact with, sort of conflating or rather confusing sort of blatant support for all Israeli policies and versus just supporting Israel and being a Zionist?
Oh my gosh, all the time. I would say most of the time people don't understand anything about that. Even coming from like back in university, when somebody comes up to you and they start to question Israeli policies or something, they just take it as, so you're a Jew who supports Israel, therefore you are against Palestinians, therefore you are whatever it may be.
And so many people have this bad idea of Israel in their head too, where they think it's a third world country or that it's absolutely war torn. And I have to explain to them that, like, no, it's actually very technologically advanced and it's actually super safe to just walk around.
Yeah. So we're constantly trying to educate people, and especially for if you start talking about Palestinian human rights as well, there's a lot that people don't understand that goes on in, say, Gaza or the West Bank, where you have to explain that there are people living in oppression under Hamas or the other, like, whatever organization is, PLO. So it's important to also look at the narrative from, I guess, a human rights perspective and say, like, there's Jews, there's Israeli Jews, then there's Palestinians, there's Muslim Arabs, like, here's what's going on. And you need to really look at it from the broader picture. Yeah. You can't just make an assumption and just, believe it's just the dichotomy between Palestine and Israel or Jews and Muslims. There's so much more there.
Yeah. The zero-sum game tendency is frustrating when you try to come to it from like a nuanced point of view, and it could definitely resonate. So back to your like Instagram page / podcast, I noticed that you guys started making the carousels with all the text and the nice drawing. So has that been more like the push on Instagram, has that been more rewarding or equally rewarding as a podcast page? Like, how do you see them combining to sort of transmit your message? Which has been more effective?
I think it really depends. The podcast, we only have, I think on average, 42 listeners is what
it's growing.
Anchor says, but it's growing. But our Instagram definitely gets more people. I think that post that we did about, was it the UAE or was it the other one? Either way, but it got 200 and some likes and people were commenting on it. And it definitely is more engaging for people.
It's interesting because I find for us personally, I feel like people are there right now listening to the podcast, or they're getting their information from Instagram or social media. And
it's a lot of both.
It's not, I don't think we have a lot of conversion between people who are looking at what we're releasing on Instagram and then going to our podcast and vice versa yet. But I'm hoping that by putting out some factual information about things that people, again, getting their news source from social media, if we can educate them via social media, then that can at least help our overall goal of educating people.
Yeah, we definitely see that, where it's like, it's just, the podcast is just like a realm where it's like, it's a long form content. You have to like, people have to kind of commit in a way. It's easier when you're coming from like a brand, right? If you're coming from like a known brand, people will probably listen to you. So it definitely will take longer because it just takes longer for the person to consume it. And that's why we started shortening our episodes and then also kind of pushing clips, because people's attention spans are low. And like, as much as we'd love to, you know, have hours of conversations with people, it has to be limited to at least 30 minutes or else, you know.
No one's.
And then also having video.
We noticed that with one of our episodes as well. We had one part of it and got a lot of listens, and then the second part was a little bit longer and it didn't get nearly as many.
And it was still a great interview, but unfortunately it was so good that it was like an hour-long episode. And then we had to cut it in half, and then people just didn't listen to part 2 of it, which was so unfortunate because it was so amazing.
Yeah. So if there's any advice, I mean, we're dealing with the same issues. Clips, like, grab those moments that you feel are great and clip them, share them, IGTV if they're at least a minute, and you know, and then there's they're teasers. So then the more people see that, the more they'll be like, okay, I want to listen to the whole thing. So we're definitely starting with the same.
Pretty much what we're trying to do.
Doing it. Yeah, I see you're doing it. So
yeah, it's definitely so good. And you guys have a YouTube as well, right?
Yeah, we share the whole video on YouTube. Like, this is going to be shared on YouTube, the visual, and then I usually just export the audio, and we also use Anchor and just send it out. You mentioned the UAE as a popular post, and we had a recent conversation. Isaac, I'll let you ask the question. I'm just gonna tee you up. So when you talk about like, we called it the new state solution, and it was based off an article that somebody wrote on the New York Times, where it was basically talking about, you know, alternative solutions to what's going on. And we mentioned in that same episode that I personally always thought that the way that it was going to happen was through cooperation with the different major Arab states. And that was like a week before the news came out. So, Isaac, you wanna take the question?
Yeah. Oh, I see. Got it. When you think about bringing about a quote unquote solution, what are your respective solutions to the situation? Is the peace with UAE a sign of changing times or more of the same?
This is such a good question. We were actually discussing this
earlier.
We
have different answers for this, so you answer first and then I'll answer second. Like, we might be the same, but we're also, I think,
we were literally discussing this earlier because we had somebody private like DM us, and they have friends who are Jewish, they have friends who are like Israeli Palestinian, and they asked us for our answer. So for me, because of my background, I used to work with Lavi, who, if you know, like Rudy Rochman, he's on the World Zionist Congress for Lavi, that party. So I've understood a little bit of where they're coming from. And my answer to you would be that if there's a way for the people to come together and work together as, say, Israelis and Palestinians, I think that would be the best solution. I did listen to your episode where you discussed finding a solution in the New York Times article. And I think it is hard to find a solution coming from, say, just like America or just another country, another superpower, for example. I think a solution would best be between the people. I know that when we were discussing this earlier, though, you need to have a mutual respect, and you can't have a peace partner that wants your destruction at the same time. So it's going to be, if there is a solution to peace, I don't think it's going to come about like a one state or a two state, or like it needs to be some sort of integration between, say, Palestinians and Israelis, whatever that might look like for me.
And I'm personally of a little bit more radical belief that it won't happen ever until they stop wanting to try and kill us.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, I mean,
it's
a hard question to answer. There is no answer. But I definitely, I'm with Rudy on the sense of like, they're not going anywhere. As much as I agree that like with you, Ray, that it's annoying because their intentions are not the same, and they don't hide it. You can look at all their logos. The entire map of Israel is on all their logos. So,
and I think too, that's their priority more so than having an actual state, is us not having one.
Right. So yeah. It's not something that can be solved on podcasts for sure, and it's definitely something that needs to happen between them, Yeah. So, and we talked about this a little bit, but independently from like breaking news and being podcast hosts, do you view yourselves as more Jewish educators or Israel advocates?
Oh, that's such a good question.
That's a good question. I would say just advocates for Judaism and Israel.
Like,
for me,
synonymous. Like, I feel like you can't separate the two. That's, I think, my biggest thing, and how I got into advocacy is because a lot of people would be okay with you being a Jew on campus, but if you were a Jew who supported Israel on campus, then it was a no-go zone. So I think for myself, it's just explaining the Jewish religion and beliefs and how Jews are and indigenous peoples, and how Judaism is inextricably linked to Israel. And I think that's probably our belief.
I would agree with that.
So I'm not answering your question, but I'm kind of answering your question.
We spoke with, I'm sure you've seen Unpacked. They just make a lot of like cool short explainer videos about everything about Israel, and now they're doing like a Jewish history series. And so we had the privilege of interviewing their head of education. And one of the main things that he spoke about was that Jewish education and Jewish advocacy or Israel advocacy are completely different. They're on the same spectrum. They're on the same spectrum of things, but it's one of them is you're trying to convince somebody of something as opposed to you're trying to just give them the facts. So that's what we see our blog, the On This Day in Jewish History. It's just facts. Almost like very rarely will you see like an opinion. Usually it's me adding my own personal opinion, but it's almost always fact-based. And you can argue with me if you want. We have very little hate comments because of that. I think we had one time I decided to do hashtag PLO, and we had a psychopath jump in the comments. So I was like, no, I know, don't hashtag a terrorist group. So yeah, it's I agree with you that it's very similar, but it is different in the sense where like I think shouting him out again, but Rudy is the perfect example of like both. He is both an Israel advocate and he's also an educator, and you can tell when he does the switch. And sometimes it's not a switch. Sometimes he's doing one and the same. So, yeah, it's fine.
So as advocates for both Judaism and Israel, both sort of side by side and simultaneously, how do you not deal with, but how do you reconcile a lot of Jews within the diaspora, many of whom I'm friends with, that have a very strong Jewish identity, yet don't identify with Israel? It's not like they're anti-Israel or they don't recognize Israel. They either don't want to touch the topic, or it just doesn't factor into their American Jewish experience.
I think a lot of them actually probably don't like us, but don't associate with us. I think some of them
wouldn't listen to us.
They wouldn't listen to us. I know and I like personally, on a personal level, I really don't. Like, it doesn't matter to me if people have different beliefs, different political beliefs than me. I'm fine with it. I do think, though, that the people that are like that are probably the most vocal at coming after us. We do get other Jews like who do not like us and will actually attack me, like us. I would say personally on my personal Facebook, I've been attacked by a Jewish girl who pretty much said to me that
one who actually lives in Israel, though.
Yeah, we've been attacked by other Jews. So we didn't, if they feel the way they do, we don't really care. Like, everybody has their own belief system, but we do get attacked by them.
On that note, though, for me too, like I personally can't see how, as a Jewish person, you wouldn't want to at least stand up for Israel a little bit or know some facts on it, just because historically it is kind of important for us, and again, in my mind, to have Israel. And in the coming years, with anti-Semitism getting worse and worse increasingly, I think it's going to be important for us to have that.
Yeah, and that's actually going back to your saying about whether you're an Israel educator or a Jewish educator. We've done histories on episodes on the history of Israel, and just to understand where the Jewish perspective lies, because I don't think a lot of people really, even Jews, really understand
or
how
research it, really.
Like, no one really understands how Israel came into being the modern day state that it is, or that the histories, or understanding the aliyahs, or what the land sales were like, or who was in possession of it. So when we come from this perspective, we want to also educate people on the history, because that is factual and that is an opinion, and people can form their opinions on that. But for Jews, we do get attacked by Jews for standing up for the Jewish people, which is kind of weird. But a lot of Jews don't feel that we should be doing what we're doing.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is. Like, I remember the last one I had was from a girl who, she served in the IDF and everything, but she told me that I wasn't doing enough for the BLM movement, and that it was hypocritical for me to stand up for the Jewish people as much as I do, even though I've been doing this for over 10 years. So this came out of the blue, and I've always advocated for everybody's rights. Like, I was on campus working with the Palestinian organizations, but
just quickly, there's a phrase in last week's Parsha where it says, it's a famous, and they always abuse it, where it says, justice, justice, you shall pursue. And the reason that it says justice, justice is because justice alone isn't justice. You need to be in a sphere of justice. So when you say, like, oh, you're not supporting the Black Lives Matter movement enough because you're supporting your Jewish movement, it's like, it's not about one or the other. It's about justice as a form, as a thing. So that's why the Torah repeats the word to emphasize it.
And to flip that around, did you ask the person that was criticizing you from BLM when they've come to support the issues or causes that you champion?
No, I did.
Well,
and
it works both ways, right? I mean,
it was just like, I'm an Israeli. I was in the army.
Yeah, that's all she
for
said.
you, but
that was it. I had spoken to her about how, because I actually worked with this girl. I worked with her sister in advocacy for years. Years and years, I spoke at the Canadian Institute of Jewish Research with her sister. Her sister is actually a lawyer, and it got me into wanting to do pre-law to work for human rights. So it was ironic that this girl never had a problem with me advocating for human rights before, or I did Indigenous research and like Aboriginal law, rights, return, all that I love and I've studied. So she never had a problem before, but it was only because of this movement that she had a problem. So that's where I was like, where are you coming from?
Shared something on Facebook about it.
Yeah, because I said about how people who are not speaking up against anti-Semitism we know that you're not speaking out against anti-Semitism, and it set her off. But yeah, she didn't really have an answer. It was just a personal attack.
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing. I remember being at UMass, and I think other campuses adopted a similar slogan, sort of stand together against racism. And you can see these big banners all over campus. And there would be both sort of the Israel organizations and sort of Hillel and the Jewish organizations would feel pressure to sort of publicly support, even though we have no issue publicly supporting anti-racism initiatives. But, whenever you want to fight, or whenever we wanted to have an initiative exclusively against anti-Semitism, that was never okay. Like, anti-Semitism had to be lumped together with all other forms of prejudice or forms of ethnic bigotry in order to get recognized at all. And I think I think that's really problematic, but I think what you illuminated is part of why.
I agree with you.
It reminds me of the victim thing that we discussed with Yehuda. Because we were talking to, on one of our episodes, we discussed with a friend of ours, Yehuda, but he had mentioned how Jews, we just never take that victim mentality despite all that we've been through. So it's hard for people see us as privileged, and it's hard for them to think of us as, I guess,
as a minority, or as a hated minority.
And having these injustices committed against us. Even though, if you look at ADL statistics, B'nai B'rith for Canada, their statistics, you can see that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and majority.
Very much so.
Is it equally on the rise in Canada as it is in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if equally, because our population
proportionately, I don't know, but I know that it was on the rise. B'nai B'rith Canada releases a report every year, and it has been climbing.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, I think it's been pretty much the last 2 years looking at the reports. it was climbing the same as you guys were. This year, however, I don't know if we've had, I know it's been climbing, but I don't know if it's been climbing to the rate that it has there.
Yeah. It's interesting because like you said, like Jews aren't really white, but they're also not white, and then so it's like you just don't conform into these like Western definitions of race or whatever, like, and it confuses somebody that you can be both Jewish and atheist or not, or like a Jew will be a Jew regardless of their color of skin, and it's
my brother sorry to cut you off. My brother had a girl over, and she had clearly like never really been around Jewish people that much, and she was talking to me, and it was all about the BLM movement and stuff, and I was talking to her about it, and she was like, well, we have white privilege and we grew up white, and I was like, I'm gonna stop you there.
Well, no,
I'm Jewish.
It's not white, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We want to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah, they are.
Or more personal. You want to take it, Isaac?
Yeah, sure. So in the last 5 years or so, what new belief or habit has most improved your life as a result of doing said belief or habit?
Following through on what I say. My husband told me, he's like, Sam, you never fail anything because you never finish it. So I'm like, oh, okay. So I would say just doing what we're doing with the podcast would be a big part of that, and actually following through, setting goals, doing many habits to achieve those goals is incredible.
And I think I'm more on the spiritual side, where in the last 5 years I've come like more into my Judaism, I guess, and like more into my Jewish identity, where I'm more open about it than I was before, and that kind of stuff. Like,
that's definitely
will
helped
not be
us.
silenced, basically, at this point.
And it's helped us with where we are going, I think, with the podcast as well. Me keeping myself accountable and you being so proud. That combination has gotten us a lot further, I'd say, than
I think so. Yeah.
in a long time.
So as part of a recurring conversation that we want to have with all of our guests, and I don't know if you caught this clip, but we basically, it fascinates us because we look at it from a historical standpoint, and the word anti-Semitism is actually anti-Semitic. And the reason for that is because it was created by a German Jewish hater, or whatever you want to call it, a German anti-Semite who, his name is Wilhelm Marr, in the 1870s, who basically wanted to turn Jewish hatred into sort of something that you can study and you can analyze, you can water it down. And so he came up with the word anti-Semitism, and it stuck. And now that's how we describe Jewish hatred. So should we perhaps start a movement to change the word to something like Jewish hatred or Judeophobia or anti-Jew? And because we've seen the repercussions of saying anti-Semitism, because now people will say, I can't be an anti-Semite because I'm a Semite, or you're not a Semite, so I'm not being anti-Semitic. So, right, connected to the conversation about race and skin color. So do you believe that it's kind of too late and that people already understand the word to be Jewish hatred, or should we, what's your opinion on that?
So I feel like it's a two-edged sword on that one, because it is become such a word that we use all the time. It's when you Google it, it is like Jew hate. That's how you find most of your research. Like if you were going to Google the ADL anti-Semitism report, for example, that's what would come up. But on the same note, like, yeah, you're totally right with you're not a Semite, or you're not, or I'm also a Semite, so I can't be anti-Semitic. I feel like you can word this also better, but yeah, I feel like it's a double-edged sword. Like I feel like changing it could be positive, but it also could be very negative.
I would be opposed though to a more of a, I guess, a youth movement kind of changing it. Like if people like you guys and we were to start to adapt something new, because I know that for me, I've seen a lot of people almost using it against us and being like it's so watered down right now. And I keep on getting the comments like, oh, you're just going to say this is anti-Semitic. And I get so much of that I'd be okay if there's something stronger, a way to just to be more direct and call them out as it is.
But on that note too, I feel like if we did try to change it, there would be those people that would be like, oh, the Jews are just trying to bring up a new phase to cahoodle us or whatever.
So
but I mean, that's always gonna happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, we're on board to make a new word, so we'll
like
workshop it.
Social media, we can totally do it. So
yeah. We just need to communicate every time you guys want to do a movement or something. We'll be like, okay, we'll tell our people.
I mean, Jew hatred is not bad, or I like Judeophobia.
Judeophobia, that's a really good one.
That applies to like
that's a
so
really
many
good one.
things too.
Because so many people are just, they attack you for your, oh my goodness. Like, sorry to not finish my thought, but do you guys get any about, what's the ones we're getting? Oh, it's the Goyim. Like, and the Goyim's onto you. I guess you guys don't get a lot of hate like that. We get so many weird ones where we put
I've seen it. I mean, I have a Twitter account where it's like I have a fake profile and a fake name, and I literally just go on Twitter to just reply to these idiots. And yeah, they basically took Goyim and they like flipped it, and they don't realize that it literally just means the nations. Like, chill, bro.
Well, I was doing some research for a post of ours the other day, and it was about the Elders of Zion. So I looked up and read part of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and that's like where the Goyim hijacking comes from, basically, because they use it so much in that book where it's like capitalized and like in bold, so it's like we don't want the Goyim to know, and like all that's stupid. It was such a
and I've gotten into fights with that. The one guy, it was just a really funny fight, and I was just playing with him. Like, he just came onto our page to hate it. I was having fun, but in the end he was like, the Goyim are on too, and I was like, oh really? We don't talk like that. But all those conspiracy theories about Jews.
Yep.
Yeah, it's good stuff. We're gonna the anniversary of that document is like in 2 weeks or something, so
Great.
Happened to come around the same time as the FBI decided to retweet it, so
yep, it's fun stuff.
All right, last question.
Yeah, just to wrap up here. So if you had a gigantic billboard, so if each of you had a gigantic billboard that you could put anywhere where millions or billions of people could see it and have access to it, what would it say and why?
Giant billboard.
It doesn't have to be related to Judaism or
I feel like I would just put like
a personal.
and like some super Jewish like quote of some kind, just to make people really mad. I would just do it to make them mad. I don't know what you would do, but I would just
do it to
spite somebody.
I feel like one of those ones where, you know, like the people that sound with the billboards or the cardboard, and it's like, convince me why or something. If you could do like, Jews aren't white, convince me why, or try to like change my mind or something on it. I think that'd be hilarious. Something, I don't know, we're like hellraisers.
Also really radical.
I don't know, doing something just to like, get a conversation going, which would be great.
Yeah, something that would get a conversation going between like that 80% and piss off the other.
Something like the 67 borders aren't borders.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on our show, Samantha, Rae, Diaspora Radio. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Hope to do this again.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having us.
We would love to do it again.
Definitely.